Welcome to this Talking with Tech Recast episode. Recast episodes are episodes from the past that feature legacy content fundamental to building better practices. Whether you're new to the podcast or have been with us since episode 1, you're sure to enjoy this remastered episode. Have fun!
Well, welcome back once again to Talking with Tech. This is Lucas Steuber, joined as always by Chris Bugaj. How are you, sir?
Fantastic.
And of course by Rachel Madel. How are you?
I'm doing really good.
Well, today we're talking about something I'm actually really excited to address because we get asked questions about it all the time, and it's one of those things that really underpins a lot of arguments around augmentative and alternative communication in a variety of ways, and that is motor planning. Chris, I'm curious to ask you, why is this so controversial?
I don't know, because Lucas, when I think of it, I think about like how are our words, if I'm using verbal speech, how is that organized in my brain, So I picture like a little troll or gnome that lives in my brain, and when I need to go get a word, it runs over to the little filing cabinet and it pulls out the word that I'm looking for. And the only way it can do that is because the words are organized in this little library in my brain, right? And so when you're talking about people who use augmentative communication devices, the words just can't be kind of randomly placed anywhere on a board. They have to be organized as well so that their little troll can go know and find where it is. Is that a weird way to explain it? I don't know. That's how I think of it.
I like trolls in all my metaphors, so I'm totally in for that. The way that I've heard that referred to back in my linguistics days was semantic priming, right? That we have we have patterns in our language use the same way that we have patterns in our muscle use, which then begs the question, is everything planned out in that way? Do we have channels that we keep on repeating over and over again? Like, is articulation itself, for example, a function of motor planning?
I think so. In fact, we're going to hear this a little bit later when we talk to Chris in the interview, but we use that exact sort of analogy that motor planning for someone using a communication device is very similar to motor planning of how I use my articulators,
Well, and the only thing I could think of that would be different about those is that if you have a poor motor plan for articulation, you might still be speaking, but it's going to be less intelligible, right? I mean, that's the nature of articulation therapy. Whereas motor planning, if you don't have a motor plan for an ASC device, the implication, at least from my perspective, is that that's going to impact the rate of production, right? You're going to be sitting there hunting and pecking, the same way you do on a keyboard when you first start learning.
Well, maybe not just the rate. I mean, definitely the rate, Lucas, but could it also be just development in general? If you keep moving the icons around, how do you learn where the words are? The only way my little troll could know to go and find the word that I need is it's always in the same filing cabinet in my brain. So the only way my tongue can say the L sound is that it's always in the same spot. And if it keeps moving around, then the L sound never comes out.
And a way that I like to present this to people is, with an iPhone or an Android, if you're an Android user. We all learn exactly where the buttons are. I can navigate to Facebook in my sleep. But if I picked up your phone, Chris, I would probably be searching through lots of folders to try to find Facebook. I know where it is in my sleep. 1, because I use Facebook way too much. 2, because I've learned where the motor plan is. I know that motor plan because of so much repetition and practice. So I think it's important, when you're describing this concept to teachers and paraprofessionals, I always use that example because everyone has a phone and everyone knows how to navigate, to their favorite apps in their sleep. But I think this is really important when we're, doing AAC stuff.
So Rachel, it's funny you bring up Facebook because back in the day when Facebook was first starting, they would change up where everything was, and you get these people that would rage quit. They moved everything around. It was before we even had phones, and Facebook was just on the computer. And people would go over and they'd be like, "Where's my friend list? They kept moving it. That's it. I'm leaving Facebook," because Facebook did not understand back in the day motor planning. And it actually freaks people out when you move their stuff around.
Yep, that's happening right now with a website that I use that I probably shouldn't admit that I use called Reddit, where they're going through a big redesign, and it is causing riots. I've never seen people so angry. But you're absolutely right. It's about this expectation of where things are supposed to be from a motor standpoint. And since I like to use big words, another term for this is oral somatosensory awareness, right? Which is just basically knowing where your tongue and lips are at all times. So when we talk about AAC, we're also talking about somatosensory awareness. And I'll tell you from all the modeling that I do, I have different starting postures with my hands depending on which app I'm using. right? And I'm sure they're nowhere near as reinforced as the students that use the same app every single day. I mean, I've seen people that can play lamp like a piano, and I'm still sitting there trying to figure out where the word B is.
Yeah, I think you see that, Lucas, that some of the most proficient users of AAC devices can use it without looking at the overlay.
Yep, absolutely.
Because it's all motor planning.
So how do we take this idea of motor planning and actually use it in our practice and consider it? And I think the biggest time is when you're doing assessment, figuring out, what type of system. And the nice thing is a lot of these systems now understand the importance of motor planning and then support it with their system and their app. But what I like to do is really consider the long-term user, right? So when I'm assessing a child, they might only be using, single words or sometimes not even that. So we have this idea that, we're only using a few words. Let's just have a grid system that has, 8 buttons, for example. And the problem with that is inevitably children's vocabulary will grow, with time and development and teaching. And what happens when all of a sudden we have to double the grid size and then triple the grid size? Every time we lose all of those motor plans. So something that I'm really passionate about with the kids that I see for an assessment is, yes, I think we should start developmentally at an appropriate level for vocabulary. And, that doesn't mean giving a child, 77 buttons or 77, vocabulary items, although some would argue with me against that. It's another conversation, but I think that it's important to think long-term so that you're not constantly every year or 2 years being like, oh, well, we ran out of space. Let's just increase. Instead you can, a lot of the apps have masking and you can mask the vocabulary items.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, that's the philosophy behind, say, speak for yourself, where you're able to keep the same grid size, but hide the vocabulary until the user is developmentally ready for it.
Exactly.
It's interesting how people choose to start when they're starting to implement AAC. I see on different Facebook groups, a lot of people posting their core boards that they're using. And I always have to ask when I see something like that, where are you going with that? Because at some point, if you believe the student's going to say more than what's on that core board, then you're going to have to give them a device. And there's some research that kind of backs this up. And there's a quote here, we'll link it in the show notes, but there's a quote from Duchovny, 2014. And here's the quote. It says, "The practice of starting with simple technologies and switching to unrelated complex devices later may negatively affect language development." That's pretty important. That's like a very important thing. Like starting with simple and then going to complex might actually have a negative impact on language development, as opposed to just starting with the more complex device, like you were sort of suggesting, Rachel. So I just want to say there's some research that supports this sort of notion that we should start with the more complex devices. Of course, never enough research, so get out there, grads, do some more.
Yeah, those of you listening, get out there and start researching. And you know what? I see both sides of it. I think that there are absolutely situations in which a student might need a very small field with very large icons for visual reasons or for motor access reasons or whatever that might be. So it's never going to be perfect. But I think, on the whole, if we can preserve, like a good example of this is there are certain icons across systems that I always try to have at least in the same place, if that makes sense. So I have a lot of users of touch chat, for example. And so in the lower right-hand corner, I always have a button that says something along the lines of, "I made a mistake." And that will be consistent across many pages, across many devices. So at least then there's conceptually this knowledge, even if the thumb doesn't know exactly where to go, we're not completely relearning. Do you feel like I'm right to do that? Because I've doubted myself many times.
I did the same thing. And, with various things. And I think that consistency is really important, especially with these compensatory strategies. Like, I need help. I made a mistake. These things that, come up with AAC users and when they're using their devices. So absolutely. I think it's important for them to always kind of know generally where that is, that specific phrase.
Right.
Lucas, can I just say something there? There's something even more important that what you just said, which is you asked the question, I don't know, do you think I'm doing this right? Which I think is something we often, because I'm doing it, then it must be right, as opposed to I'm doing this and I'm wondering if it's right. Let me go ask some other people just to get some sort of feedback so that I'm just not going on my own expert opinion. You know what I mean? I think that's just a huge skill that we all need to develop as therapists, is to be able, maybe I'm messing this up. Let me go ask somebody else. And I just think I have mad respect for you to ask that question.
I fully accept your praise and enjoy it, and I thank you very much. But one of my my practicum supervisors years and years ago told me one of the best things I could do as a clinician is to enter every session with the assumption that everything that I know is wrong. And sort of reteach myself based on the data, right? Look at what's been successful, because assessment is a never-ending process. So thank you for saying that. I wish I could take credit for that sentiment, but I think that it's something that all of us should be doing is asking. And fortunately, I have access to experts right here on this podcast that can give me feedback. And you know what? Those of you listening, you absolutely do too. Please come join us at Facebook. We love to answer questions, and we love to admit it when we're wrong.
Hey, Lucas, I want to jump in and say something else too. You said sometimes there's times where you might start with like 4 large icons and then build out from there. And I think there's 2 different ways to do that, right? Let's say you start with 4 words and you have these large icons. One concept would be to then, as the student grows language, the icons get smaller, and then you can put more icons on that same visual display, the same screen size, if you will, right? But that is often changing the location of where the icons are. So you're changing the motor plan, right? Which would be a kind of going against what we've been talking about here today. The other way to think about it is you start with those 4 icons, and then picture like a frame around the outside. You're going to add words around the outside so that you're growing the display. You're going along I don't want to say fringe, the edge, adding more words along the edge. And that way, the words would be kept consistently in the same space. There's more things to consider there, but I think it's an important consideration when you're trying to figure out, okay, which direction am I going, right? I listen to that podcast, and they say, okay, just know where you're going. Well, those are 2 considerations you could have. Are you shrinking or are you growing?
Right. That's a very good point. And we're really also so far only addressing direct select, right? So what about that user that's used to having to hit the switch 7 times to get to the desired message, right? And all of a sudden that changes. I mean, that's a whole different kind of motor planning. What about the eye gaze user who's, has a specific motion grammar, which is tiring? If you haven't sat in front of an eye gaze device and tried to communicate for 5 minutes, I encourage you to do so, because you're ready for a nap afterwards. I am so impressed by the stamina of those users. So, I mean, these are all important things to think about. Now, of course, they're not the only things to think about, right? There's no reason why we need to exclude best practices in one area in favor of another. Now, what about is this more important when we have students with more limited motor skills? Like, what about overlays on the device? What are some specific unique cases?
Well, I actually find that kids who have issues with motor planning, they have issues across the board, right? Which is partially sometimes why they're not able to communicate verbally, which is even more of a reason to make sure we're supporting motor planning and AAC use. But, specifics for kids who are having motor planning issues, sometimes they have fine motor challenges. So I think it all kind of ties in together. So, one good solution is having a key guard or a touch guide, or there's a lot of technology now that allows for help with kids who are having fine motor issues. It's not as severe as they can't do direct select, but it just helps increase their accuracy and decreases frustration.
All right. Well, we've said a lot about motor planning here. There's a lot more to say, and I would like to hand it over to one of the experts, Chris Klein, who's actually somebody that I've learned a lot about this from before in the past. So I'm excited to have him on. Chris conducted the interview. Do you have any comments ahead of time?
I just want to say that what you're about to hear, because he's a device user, we've actually edited down. So the way Chris communicates is he uses his toe on a Vantage. He's going to talk about that a little bit. and he is generating word by word, and he's got the speak word function turned on. So as he presses a word, or as he uses even word prediction, he starts to spell a word, you're hearing those spellings and you hear the word one after another. And then when he's done with composing his entire sentence, he hits the speak display and it says the entire thing again. So you hear it twice. So for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to cut it down so you're only hearing that final part. Just know that that's not exactly the true essence of the communication. It's going to sound much more fluid to you because of the magic of editing.
Well, that's great. I'm really looking forward to it. Without further ado, Mr. Chris Klein.
Well, welcome to Talking with Tech, and today I am visiting with Chris Klein. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do?
I am Chris Klein. I have been working with AAC 39 years now, and now I'm helping educate people about AAC, which we will get into later. I am Chris Klein. I have been working with AAC 39 years now, and now I'm helping educate people about AAC, which we will get into later.
So, Chris, for those who don't know you, can you describe what you use and how you access it?
I'm using a Pathfinder, which is a min-speed device. I'm using direct selection with my big left toe.
And you are generating things off the top of your head, right?
Yes, I am. Words are just popping into my head, and my Pathfinder is like playing the piano or just like you talking.
Can you describe that a little bit more? What do you mean by that, playing the piano?
I don't have to think about where anything is. I'm just letting words pop into my head, and I have a natural motor plan to say those words.
Okay, so let me just break this down for a second, Chris. I think what you're talking about with the words popping into your head, I think we call this spontaneous novel utterance generation in biz.
Yes.
Right? So I think this is the goal for so many people like me who are working with young children, so many parents, so many speech therapists. So what do you attribute that? I mean, I guess that's happening in your brain all the time, right? But now you're expressing it some way. How do we help people get there? How did you learn to do that?
I believe that should be let go of families, parents, speech-language pathologists, and educators, but I don't believe it is let go. For the most part, I would say the goals are set way too low for somebody that is starting out with an AAC device. It's either about reading the educational standards or saying needs and wants. It isn't about learning language and becoming proficient with using language. I know I get frustrated hearing this statement. Yes, not everybody will be a Chris Klein, but everybody can learn language and be proficient with what they have in front of them. And just to add to that, I believe first it starts by believing they can learn language and then giving them access to everyday language, which probably gets us to the next question.
Yeah, I think so. So first, I just want to say, Chris, I think that what you said is so true because when I coach other people, I find that, just today I was talking to a teacher and she's like, yeah, I don't know if he'll ever use that thing. And I'm like, no, you're the one who has to. If you don't believe he's going to do it, then he's not going to. So, okay, let's get into the next question, which is you did a talk at ATIA, which is the Assistive Technology Industry Association conference back in 2018. And it was called the External Lexicon, right? So can you explain what you mean by the external lexicon and what does that mean for people who use speech-generating devices? And then, what does that mean for people who teach other people how to use it?
The external lexicon is whatever AAC device they are using in front of them. If you think about it, we all have an internal lexicon in our heads, and for those of us who can communicate, words are just popping into our heads, and we have a natural motor plan to say that word. That is why many of us will say something stupid because we're really not thinking about what we are saying. We're just letting words pop into our head. So I believe this is happening with people who use AAC. Words are still popping into their head, but now they have another external lexicon to navigate to find that word. If the search task takes too long, I believe they're losing their train of thought, and the sentence they had coming becomes shorter, and even sometimes incomplete. This is why I'm a big advocate of one, core vocabulary on a device, and secondly having a motor plan to access that vocabulary. I have to say, I was blessed to start on the Handyverse 110. It had core vocabulary on it, but it had a motor plan to say those words. So, once I had learned the device, I didn't have to think about where anything is. I just let words pop into my head. I believe that is so important to take into account when we think about AAC. The AAC device has to give access to everyday vocabulary, but also give that person a natural motor plan to access that vocabulary. Otherwise, the search task is going to limit them in their development. Yes, I know that's a controversial statement, but I believe I'm onto something.
So, Chris, can I jump in here?
Yes.
So you said you used a different device before you used the Vantage, is that right?
Yes.
And that device didn't have quite the number of words as the Vantage does, is that right?
Yes.
So if you could go back in time, do you wish you had the Vantage earlier, or are you happy you started with a vocabulary that was less? Which do you advocate for kids now that are
Well, like I said, I was lucky to start on the Handyverse 110 because it was like this one and gave me access to everyday words. Sure, I would have loved to have my Pathfinder all the way through my life, but I'm old, so I had the best device back then. However, I am going to say always start people with the biggest vocabulary.
Okay, so that, I think you said, I know that's a controversial statement before, but I think what you just said is another controversial statement because I think people, think, oh, that's too many words, and that it's too visually overwhelming. Why would you want to advocate for the largest vocabulary?
I get that, but it's important to establish that motor memory, which is another controversial statement. But without that, I don't believe you can learn language in the way others do.
Chris, I don't understand why it's so controversial to people, because when I had to learn the word drink, when I was a little baby and I was in my diaper and I'm walking around with my bottle and I say the word drink, my tongue is moving in a certain way, right? I'm saying the D sound and then the R sound, and I probably messed it up with a W, but then
Right.
And so this is just another form of motor planning that.
Right.
And when you were learning the word drink, you're finding it on your device and you're pushing this button plus this button equals saying the word drink. It's the same analogy, right?
Right, to me it's the exact same thing, however. You bring them up to anybody else, and I think they'll argue.
Yeah, but I don't know why. Some people say, okay, that motor planning is just a thing that helps people get faster, but it's not necessarily helping them learn the language. Like, it's not that. Is it important for learning language, or is it just important to be faster at saying language you already know?
Planning and motor memory is definitely a rate enhancement tool. There is no argument about that, but I believe it is necessary to learn language. I don't believe people think about that in the field of AAC because we are so focused on every other thing beside this. If you think about how a child develops language who is able to speak, they have a natural motor plan to say the word. That is so important when they are developing language. Like I said, a person using AAC has to navigate through an external lexicon, so if the word isn't quickly accessible with the motor plan, it slows the development of language. As a person who majored in kinesiology and still get involved with teaching college athletes, motor memory is essential. The best athletes aren't thinking about what they have to do, they are just doing it. I believe it's the same for communication. You aren't thinking about what you are doing, you are just communicating. I don't know if there are any studies out there, but I believe it's something we need to look into so that we can develop devices that takes everything into account. And let's take your example. When you said drink, what did your mom or dad do?
But no, they gave me a drink, right? I said drink.
Right, so isn't that learning?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I think it's tied together. I think you and I are on the same page there. Well, let me ask this too. When you say external lexicon, how is that different than an internal lexicon or just a lexicon?
It's different because it's organized differently. So like you can say whatever, whenever, and it comes out fine right, well mostly.
So the external lexicon, what you mean by that, if I think I understand, is you can't just have a bunch of random words kind of puked up on a page.
Right.
They have to be organized in some way. So that you can, okay, what does that mean for assessment? Because what I see lots of times when people are doing assessments is they'll say, all right, we have the student or the person, and we're going to put system 1 with them for like 2 weeks, and we're going to take that system away, and we're going to get another system for 2 weeks, and we're going to take that system away, and then we'll give them a third system for 2 weeks, and that seems to be
that is a major problem I see, because how do you assess someone that way when you are changing how their external lexicon is organized every 2 weeks? Do I have an answer for that? Probably not. Well, I do, but that wouldn't be politically correct, so I'll leave that.
I'm curious what it is, because I know what I've been advocating for, and I'd be curious to see if you share the same idea, which is the committee that is doing the assessment works together to look at the features the student needs and then picks a system. Like, just pick something and go with it, and don't change it. Just pick something, make a good decision. Are you saying because it's the system you prefer?
That's the idea I would say to go with. But then you have other arguments that are going to come your way that you haven't tried everything, which I don't think whoever that is, whether it's insurance or other device businesses, should matter.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Here's what I think where the bad science comes in, Chris, is that if you picked 3 things to try, and you're going to try each one for 2 weeks, I think, one, why did you pick 2 weeks? That seems arbitrary. It should be like a month. Or why did you pick a month? That was also arbitrary. If you made some sort of logical choice to choose which of those 3 you tried first, that would be the same logic to say, let's just try that one for an extended period.
Right. And I believe we would get people communicating better that way than we are today.
Do you think a lot of people do assessments that way, and they are changing up the external lexicon because of money? And what I mean by that is that back in the day when you were younger, right, getting a device cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. When I say a device, I mean a robust language system. And we've kind of held on to this old model of doing assessment that way because they cost thousands of dollars. But now it's like you can get a robust language system for under $1,000. and we still hold on to the old way of doing assessment, getting a new model. Am I crazy, or is that your take on it too?
I think you're right on. And the other thing is, I don't think we believe enough that they can do this because whoever is looking at whatever device is saying that looks impossible, just like my parents did, and my speech language pathologist said, well, just let him play with it.
So thank goodness for your speech language pathologist. If you had someone different who didn't believe, then you would be in the same boat as other people, changing different devices. And
Right.
Chris, all right, let me ask, what are you working on now? What's driving you? What's your latest quest?
How do I explain what I am doing? I guess first, I am educating people about AAC. I would say that extends from children or whoever beginning to use AAC to parents, to teachers, to speech language pathologists, and to going to universities to teach future speech language pathologists. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I'm helping communities set up social programs for people who use AAC. We want communities to have social opportunities for people who use AAC, which doesn't always mean getting people with AAC together. I believe that works well, but I believe having others there that don't use AAC is very beneficial and motivating as well. I believe we need to help people who use AAC learn how to develop and build long-lasting relationships, which is my goal in doing these things.
I totally agree. Summertime, you find there's all these AAC camps popping up, but there never seems to be one close to my area, which I guess means it's on me, right?
And I love all these camps, don't get me wrong, but I'd love to see one integrated.
Integrated, you mean like all year long, or integrated into what?
Into a summer camp where you'll have people who use AAC, but also able-bodied people working together on something. That is where I think we could make something bigger happen.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's happening in certain places, right? I mean, you organize things like that.
Yes, it's happening here on a smaller level, and now I'm trying to figure out how to grow that, which takes probably some money.
All right, so how do people get involved? How do they learn more about you? How do they donate?
It's become AAC, and now Amazon is one way. I haven't gotten PayPal set up because, well, it's pretty much impossible. They want every paperwork and still haven't gotten approved. Checks can be sent to my address, and they can get that address by emailing me at chris.klein34@gmail.com.
When they contact you, what kind of stuff do you do? Like, I know you do presentations and talks for any organization. Is that right?
I do pretty much anything they want, and of course there is a cost to whatever, but we can work it out.
Wait, I don't understand. You expect to be paid for your time? How dare you?
Hey, man, you would be surprised how many times I have gotten that.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and for getting the word out to as many people as possible about all of this stuff, all of your efforts, the external lexicon, motor memory, motor planning, believing in people, not selling anyone short. All of those are huge messages I hope us at Talking with Tech and beyond in the profession take away from our experiences with you and others like you. So thank you.
I do too, and it is my drive, so I'm not going to stop.
Chris, what is next for you? Are you going to ATIA again? Or are you going to another conference? Where can people see you if they're...
I'm hoping to go to ATIA again, like I said, trying to figure out how to change the message a little, but working on that. I'll be at Chris Novice July working with Wrecker. I think that is what they call it. Sorry, it's Penn State to me.
It's Penn State to you, right? Because you're outside of Pittsburgh? That's where you live?
No, I'm actually in Michigan, but I go everywhere.
That's right. I knew that. That's where I met you. Right. I go everywhere too, and that's why things get fuzzy. All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it. I think we might have to ask you to come back and talk about some other stuff as well, because this is just like the tip of the iceberg, right? It's some of the important things.
Yes. This is just a tip. There is a lot more work left.
Absolutely. Well, which is why you're going to ATIA and ATIA and RESNA and RERC. All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much. Any last parting thoughts or words?
Hey, make AAC fun and less about homework too. I believe that makes a difference too.
What a great final thought. Absolutely. Let's make AAC fun. Let's make school fun. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maybe the next time I'll see you is ATIA, but let's keep in touch, okay?
Yes, we will.
All right. Well, I got to tell you that was a very enriching interview for me as somebody who hasn't always understood the importance of motor planning and has learned a lot from Chris in the past. I'm just thrilled to have had him on, and I'm really grateful for his time. So, as usual, we'd love to hear your feedback in a variety of different ways.
If you haven't joined our Facebook group, you can find us at Talking with Tech. Just search it. We have a page, but we also have an amazing group full of SLPs who are just adding to the conversation, which is just really exciting. So please find us on Facebook and let us know what you think.
So definitely do check out the Facebook group. And one other thing we'd appreciate from you
is to spread the word. I mean, this is the episode to go and show your occupational therapy friends. Go, hey, have you listened to this? Because this is all about motor planning, occupational therapists. Go listen. And then when you're showing it to them, show them how to hit the subscribe button down at the bottom of iTunes or whatever podcatcher you use.
Podcatcher, I like that. It's like Dreamcatcher. I need one of those. But yes, we are on pretty much every single one of those, including Spotify and TuneIn. So once again, this is Lucas Steuber for Chris Bugaj and Rachel Madel. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your listening. This is one of the most validating things that certainly I've ever done professionally, and I'm thankful for it every day. So we'll talk to you next week and the week after, and can't wait to hear everything that you have to share. Talk to you soon.